friends, it's Cassie. Welcome back for another Brutus Monroe video. Today we're going to be focusing on the December Stamp Club stamp, which is this adorable stamp that you see here. And I know you've seen it around, but isn't that a super cutie? And then we have these beautiful watercolor panels. These are the Slimline Winter Wilderness. And we'll talk about those as we paint on them, but isn't that gorgeous? And then we also have a whole array of Aqua Pigments, all by Brutus Monroe. And I'll bring in a couple other colors, but that's what we have along with a Slimline base. So let's jump right into our coloring. We're going to start with some blue and some Periwinkle. The blue is, I think that's from their very original line, what they first came out with for colors. So they're basically your basic colors. And then this Periwinkle is more of a shimmery one. And I decided for the Skyline, we were going to go with those blues and that Periwinkle. So I have a water brush, and my water brush has decided to put a lot of water down, so I have a microfiber cloth off to the side. But what I've noticed about these watercolor panels, that even though they are super, not super thin, but they are a very thin paper, they hold the water beautifully and they blend gorgeously. So I would suggest that if you get them, if warping bothers you, you definitely would probably want to tape these down to a hardboard or something. I didn't do that because I tend to move my pieces around quite a bit, and so it worked out just fine. Yeah, mine had some warping, but I was able to work with that as well. So all I'm doing is I started with that blue on the top, and now I'm going to bring in the Periwinkle on the bottom. And watercolor to me is always one of those things that it doesn't always look right when you first get started, but you just have to keep working with it because you can definitely make it turn into something that you like. And watercolor is also another thing that you have to kind of work in layers. So it looks, like I said, not super great right now, but the more color that I add and the more I blend, which, like I said, the Aqua Pigments blend so nicely on these watercolor panels that it's just hard to go wrong. And I'm probably not even using the right kind of brush. Like I said, I have a water brush, which is fine, but mine's a pretty thin water brush. And so for a panel this big, you might want to have more than one brush that you're using. I'm going to heat set this in between layers so that way I can work with other colors and maybe even bring in extra colors or layers later on, which I will bring in some more of that blue later. But we're going to move on to the trees. So I'll bring in some Night Shift Green and some Hunter. I do want to point out that I do a little correction from time to time. You'll notice that the color, I bump it outside the line or whatever, but it's actually pretty easy to fix just using a little bit of water and my microfiber cloth. That will kind of absorb that color just a little bit, but I think I like the messiness, not necessarily messiness, that might not be the word that I'm looking for, but it's just real painterly, and so it's very forgiving is what I'm trying to say. I love the sketchiness of these panels as well because I feel like that leads you to have a lot of creative license. I'm just slapping color down, as you can tell. And I really don't have any rhyme or reason as to where my light source is coming from. I'm putting the Night Shift Green more on the lower right hand corner of the trees, and I'm putting the Hunter more on the upper left hand of the trees, but I mean, you do it how you want to. These sketches or sketchy panels just really lend to that creative ability with the watercolors, which is something that I really love. I will heat set in between when I want to add different layers, but we'll move on to the mountains now. I'm going to go with purples for the mountains. This first color is Lavender. The next color that I'm bringing in is Amethyst. And then that final one is the Night Shift Purple. I don't use a lot of it because it definitely is a very dark color, and it has a tendency to be a little bit more like black gray on this white paper. So I'll start with the Lavender, which is another one of their shimmery colors. And the Amethyst has some shimmer to it too, which on a panel like this, it's amazing. But you'll notice that I'm having absolutely no issue with blending the color. Like I said before, usually with watercolor, it starts out looking kind of messy, at least for me anyway. That's what I've noticed. It looks like, boy, we're gonna struggle with this, but I ended up blending these so beautifully, and I wasn't even using the right kind of brush. So now that I've got that Lavender down, I'm going to bring in the Amethyst, and this is what I'm talking about. It looks like that's not going to blend, but the more I work with it, it just accepts the water and the Aqua Pigments so beautifully that I don't have any harsh lines. It seems to be a really nice transition from one color to the next. Sorry, I'm off screen there just a little bit, but I'm adding that amethyst to the lower left, bringing in more of that lavender to make sure that the lines are kind of gone, and it blends really pretty. And then I'll bring in just a tiny bit of that night shift purple at the bottom. Like I said, it looks a little bit more black gray kind of color in this light. When I tilt it, it will look more purple. It's just the nature of that type of product, the night shift products. And so bringing in more of the amethyst so that we can blend that out, and then more of the lavender. I didn't have any pilling on this paper. I mean, I wasn't bringing in a lot of water. I wasn't squeezing my brush. I was letting the Aqua Pigments do all of the work. And I am so, so happy with how this panel ended up turning out. It just, looking at it makes me so happy. And these come in like a pack of, I want to say it could be 4, it could be 8. I'd have to look again, but I'll have it linked down below so you can check them out. I'll bring in some more of that blue for the little river that's down there by the little cabin. And then while I have it out, I'm going to layer up some of that blue in the upper left-hand corner so that it'll just be a little bit darker up there since everything is dry. But again, blends out beautifully. Now we're going to stamp our little December Stamp Club stamp, this darling little snowman. You wouldn't think that he might necessarily go with that panel, but I think the way I get him out there, he works. I'll bring in the amethyst, and then I'm going to paint his little Santa hat with that. I am going to bring in some blue as well, just to add some shadowing and shading eventually. And then that blends a little too much because I didn't wait for it to dry before I put down the blue. But we'll work with that. And then we'll bring in that lavender for the shadowing and shading on our snowman itself. I didn't want to bring in gray. I really wanted to bring in one of the colors from the background. So I bring that in, and then I blend it out just a little bit, just using water from my water brush. I put more water down on the glass mat, and then I do bring in some orange for his nose, but it kind of faded out, so I will bring in an orange Copic. When I could have just used this acorn color that I'm using for the cabin. So that's acorn. And then painting those out, layering on top, and then I do have to do some splatter. So now that everything is dry, I heat set all that, I'm going to bring in some Pearl Aqua Pigment and splatter that all over that background. Now the Pearl is more of a translucent, like it doesn't really have a color to it, and it just adds shimmer. So I want to bring in some of the Brutus Monroe Gesso. I'll just put a little bit of that down. It's a white paint, that's all Gesso is. So I'm going to splatter with white, and I'm going to also mix that Gesso in with the Pearl Aqua Pigment to give a little bit of shimmer and shine to it. So it's going to look like some of those snowflakes are in the far background and some of them are in the forefront, which is what I was going for. Give this piece some depth, which I thought was super fun. So I'll just keep splattering until I am happy with that, and then I will show you what that's going to look like after I'm done with all the splatter. Love it. Look at all that. We'll set that off to the side to dry, and then I need to use my circle foundation die to cut out a circle for behind my little fussy cut snowman. For our sentiment, this comes in the Stamp Club stamp as well. We're going to use a magic powder bag on some Raven cardstock, ink up the sentiment with some embossing ink, and then stamp that down, cover that with some Alabaster embossing powder, and then heat set that till that is smooth and melted. Now you will see that there is some residue left behind by the magic powder bag, but that is easily wiped away. I'm just letting it cool right now and putting everything away, and once it's kind of cooled down, I'll wipe the rest of that magic powder bag away using a microfiber cloth, and then I'll trim down my sentiment, and then we'll get ready to start assembling. So this was a slimline panel that Brutus Monroe carries in the store. These are already cut down to 7 inches by 8.5 inches, so all you have to do is score it at 3.5 inches. And because my panel is pretty warped, I'm just going to use some 1/8 inch score tape all over my panel, or my base. So I put that directly onto my base, and I'm peeling off all of that release paper. Like I said, if the warping does bother you, just make sure that you tape down your panel to a hardboard, and then you won't have as much warping. Using a dry adhesive always makes me a little bit nervous that I'm not going to put it on completely straight, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't get it completely straight, but it's okay. I guess it just adds to the handmade element of it all. I'm going to use some liquid glue on my circle that I cut out, and also on my little snowman. I love how he matches that background. And then I'll also use some on the sentiment and just kind of push that over to the right hand side, but under his little feet. And then once I have that on there, that is actually going to finish off our card. So I would love to know what you think of this. If you liked this card, go ahead and hit that like button and consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. And as always, I will see you very soon in another video. Bye, everybody.